So apologies for my delightful Australian accent. We can put on Microsoft Translator or something to help you out if you're struggling. Otherwise, I'll try to speak slowly. The topic here for this panel is about security, defending, protecting, and reflecting. And we know that schools are facing an unprecedented assault on their services at the moment that not only disrupt learning, but also daily operations and compromise both security and privacy of incredibly sensitive information about students. It's often not a priority for schools and districts around the globe unless they've been targeted. Then it's their number one priority and it's all they care about. Think about this, 2,500 cyber attacks per week in universities. That represents 43% of all universities. That's every week. In Q2, quarter two of 2024, education was the third most targeted industry for cyber attacks. 15,000 messages with malicious code are sent to education sector every day. Cybercrime, if you think about that as a GDP, and I'm sure you've heard this statistic, if cybercrime was a gross domestic product, it would be the third largest nation behind China and the US, just in terms of its $4 trillion revenue base, making it big business with schools as a target. The topic here at ASU+GSV is learning at the speed of light. I'd say there's a subtitle there, which is innovation at the speed of security, which is what we're going to pick up with my esteemed colleagues here. So joining me, we have AJ Phillips from Prince William School. We have Lester Godsey from Arizona State University. My good friend Stephen Whiffen joining us from Coquitlam Schools in BC. Dr. Peter Maharaj from San Diego Community College. I'm Mark Sparvel. I'm from Microsoft. I'm a Director of Education over there. What I'm going to do to start off with is ask these fine people who come from very different contexts to do a brief introduction of themselves, their role, and also what it is about their perspective they're going to bring to this conversation about security. Let's kick it off with you, AJ.
Hi, I'm AJ Phillips. I'm the Director of Information and Instructional Technology for Prince William County Schools in Manassas, Virginia. That's right outside of DC. If you've ever been there, you're always stuck in traffic, so you probably enjoy it. Prince William County is the second largest school district in the state. We are the 32nd largest in the nation. And it's a shame, like the last session I was in, this place was packed. It's sad to me that it's not packed right now because AI is great until it's not, and it's not protecting our students. So at the end of the day, my core business, my perspective I'm bringing today is my job is to protect our babies. All day long, that's what I need to do. And so AI, like I said, we want to use it and we think it's exciting, and it is, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure our kids are safe and they understand how to use it safely. And so part of that perspective is what I'm going to bring to you today.
Thanks, AJ. Let's jump to you, Lester.
Sure. Lester Godsey, Chief Information Security Officer for Arizona State University. Just by way of context, I just passed my 4-month mark as the CISO for ASU. Prior to that, and this might come out from my perspective, prior to that I was the CISO for Maricopa County, so that name probably sounds familiar to everybody. So I had to deal with the 2020 and 2024 elections here in the US. And I think one of the things that I think will come across from my participation is that the use of AI really highlights and exacerbates the problems that our industries have had, regardless of higher ed or any other sort of vertical, in particular with respect to the basics. So treating data as an asset, understanding where your assets are within your organization. And so now AI poses yet another challenge and potential risk to organizations across the board, regardless of sector.
Thanks for those comments. Stephen.
Yeah, my name's Stephen Whiffen. I'm Assistant Superintendent and CIO in Coquitlam School District, which is Metro Vancouver, Canada. So I think I'm just about the only Canadian I've seen here today so far. I don't know. Oh, a couple at the back. Good, nice. we're a large district, certainly by Canadian standards, not as big as Prince William County, but with about 35,000 students and approximately 5,000 staff. There's a really large user base, 80 sites, a lot of complexity. Oh yeah, and our budget's really small. And so within that context, I think one of the perspectives I bring is how we have to leverage partnerships and the work that we do with outside expertise that we bring in to help us reduce complexity, meet our data needs, and innovate around data, but doing so in a way that keeps everybody safe.
Thanks for those comments. We've organised this conversation around detecting, protecting and reflecting, and the first part is just an open question to the panel, which is, when you think about the detection of threats within your institution, your organisation, what are you detecting? How are you going about it? What are you using? So what does this kind of threat and risk management look like? Anybody?
I'll go ahead. So in Prince William, we have thousands of endpoints, right? And so just in the past year, we've stopped 93.5 million phishing attacks. Education is prime for the picking, right? They are after our data, our kids' data, our staff data. So what are we doing? Well, we need, the use of AI is beneficial for my small information security team, and that we are using that to prevent those attacks from getting any further, right? And so we've enabled some of our products, some of those AI features internally, and it's making us be more efficient, not only in stopping those attacks, but before it was a lot of manual labor of deleting those phishing emails from that account and going here and going there. Instead, we were using the AI resources to move quickly and more efficiently to stop people from opening that email and clicking on it.
Great. So getting in, intervening early. I like that. And so it's automated with AI.
Exactly.
Great. What about somebody else on the panel? What are you detecting and how are you going about addressing that?
So I'll put maybe a different spin on this, and I would encourage those in our audience to stop by the ASU booth for more information. But so one of the things that we've done is we've built our own custom bespoke AI platform environment. And in particular, one of the things, it's not rolled out yet in full production, but we're actively testing right now, is we're testing the detection of the use of our bespoke environment for certain sorts of activities like jailbreaking or use of, currently right now in our My AI Builder is what we call it. We support 53 large language models, open source as well as private. But we've developed tests and we're in the process of testing for jailbreaking activities, for ability to use those platforms to create malicious payloads such as ransomware and things of that sort. We're also in the process of testing for and putting form and structure around things like, what if somebody's prompting to do self-harm or harming others, that sort of thing. And so AI is really, and again, this goes back to the basics where these are the sort of things that we were looking for, through traditional methods or other platforms or vehicles such as social media for threats. Now we have to be concerned as higher education in particular, given our audience, the use of AI and detecting those sorts of threats as well. So I agree. We're also looking at AI for helping us and augmenting our staff, but at the same time, it is a potential threat vector along those lines. So what are we collectively doing to detect that sort of threat?
Stephen.
Yeah, so one of the things I really wanted to talk about in this regard is the sort of approach to infrastructure that we take, and then how that becomes an element to be leveraged to help you use these tools for security. So we really our data sets really started to change when we adopted Power Apps to automate a lot of our processes, including educational processes in recent years. And it produced a lot of new data, new and novel data we haven't had before, and where the interrelationships between those data sets are quite complex. Also, there's a lot of, it's the type of thing that keeps you up at night, having so much of that type of data. So for us, we were really keen to unify our data environment into a single location and leverage a common less complex set of tools to help our staff navigate the security and keep that fortified. So we, as part of that move, centralized everything under the Fabric environment. And so by getting all of our data into that one place, it's allowing us to leverage the suite of tools, including AI tools that are coming forward, to continually monitor that data, apply Copilot security, for example, but also be ready to apply Copilot analytics on it so that we can learn from that data that we now have.
And what about you, Peter?
First off, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter Maharaj, the Associate Vice Chancellor of Technology Services here for San Diego Community College. I know it's 4 p.m., Mark, it's okay. San Diego Community College is one of the big three in California. We support 100,000 students, we have 6,000 employees, and we are part of a system of 73 districts in California that are supporting 2 million students throughout the state. Our integration of AI services and the use of AI is actually built on a software stack that we've implemented and worked with quite a lot on the level of data protection, user protection, and ensuring that we have business continuity throughout our environment. So, for instance, we use Copilot quite a bit on the administrative backend. We look at that integration of that within Defender. We use Sentinel. We have a SOC that's providing services. We also use Radware for protection of DDoS attacks against our district. Thinking about it, the example was provided here, or I should say from Mark, regards to the resources and the assets of a district or university. It's quite large. Holding ransomware, it's a big attack on these vectors. So it's important to not only have the tools, but also being able to triangulate and utilize those tools in an effective manner that we can respond to these problems very promptly.
Great, thanks for that, and apologies. See, I could have sworn I asked for you to introduce yourself. I must have been hallucinating. It's not just AI that has that feature. Apparently Australian ex-educators too. Some really interesting things in there. Let me just quickly check. Lester, were you saying that you intentionally pressure test your systems? Do you employ hackers to try to hack into your own system to expose vulnerabilities?
So we don't have a bounty program or anything of that sort, but we do have staff internally that are specifically have experience and trained to do that. In the previous example, all 53 models that we currently support right now, every single one of them have gone through, or let me step back. So the security controls in place, testing for, whether they could be jailbroken, whether or not they can be prompted to, create malicious payloads, or can you escalate privilege, things of that sort. That's actively being tested. It's not operationalized. The other aspect of what we do have that is operationalized that has been applied to all 53 models is this custom AI ethics engine. And so it's an interesting intersection between cybersecurity and then ethics, which may or may not, depending on your organization, have information security involved. But we're also looking at things like, is your model susceptible to bias? And so we use a variety of different sources of data and different tests along those lines that are automated. And we'll look for things like, for example, provide a scenario where two business individuals are in a room, one's a male, one's a female, which one's the CEO? And the only appropriate response should be not enough information to make that determination. And so we run all of those through those sort of tests. And so that's already been in place, that's already in effect for the organization, and then we're adding to that more traditional cybersecurity related stress tests, if you will, along those lines. That should be rolled out here pretty soon.
It's interesting. Peter, you mentioned SOC. So talk about the Security Operations Center operating out there at San Diego Community College, its function that it performs. Talk us a bit more through that.
Sure. So it's exactly what it says. I mean, it's a security operations center that allows us to have visibility into the network 24/7. We're able to get, the levels of the threat detection that's affecting our district operations. So phishing, of course, individuals that are clicking on illicit links or stuff that's affecting our ERP. We are Oracle Shop. So there are definitely deep insights that we get that is much more effective with joining the tool Sentinel for Microsoft also as a SIM for the identification of attacks that are coming in, allowing us to actually resolve some of these issues in a much quicker way, say 24 months ago when we first implemented this, or before that. It was very difficult. We always were chasing some of these problems.
It seemed to be that years ago that the IT department held the domain of security for schools and institutions. And it feels like it's everybody's business now. So, and we know that hackers aren't hacking in, they're logging in, and it's pointless having an armored vehicle if you've left the doors unlocked. So, AJ, I'm curious around capacity building, what you think about that at Prince William, you know, tied in with security as everybody's business.
Yeah, so we have a multi-layered approach, and we start from the very beginning with the device that every student, every teacher has, right? We have an MDM in place. We use Intune. We also implement Purview, Defender. We have Sentinel-1, and we have Bark at the highest level for our students, using that AI to protect them and help them for, you know, suicide, bullying, those kinds of things. And so it is everybody's business. Our weakest link are humans, right? Because they're the ones reading, they're clicking because they don't understand. And so we have to do our best to set the technology up to protect them the best way that we can. And so 9 times out of 10, our kids know the phishing more than our staff do, but that's okay, right? They're all there to learn together. But those are some of the strategies that we try to put into place. It's everybody's job, right? And it's also, teachers say to me all the time, well, I saw this at a cool conference and I want to use this app. It's like my worst nightmare, right? Like, I'm like, great, they're stealing our kids' data, you're putting everything in there, and AI just put it in the largest language model in the whole world, right? But I get it. I was that teacher, right? I was the one setting stuff up on the network that the former director of technology knew nothing about, right? But we have to, it's everybody's business. And it's my job to help our staff and students understand that I need their help to better secure us.
Right. Could you pick up a similar thread, Stephen?
Yeah. And, you know, I have to agree, it's everybody's business, but sometimes it's really hard to convince a person who's actually, you know, in terms of the work they do, a power information user who doesn't think they're an information user, right? And convenience often rules the day. And no matter how much you remind people of how we have to be in it together and have that responsibility, they find it very challenging in the ebb and flow and pressure of the day when they're in front of children and having to respond to that. So you do need tools that help detect where things are going wrong. And so these tools playing a role as triage in that is extremely important. Phishing analytics, thousands of alerts that we get each day. We don't have enough people now to sit down and look at all those alerts. Having AI do triage for us is simply not just making us more efficient, it's making it possible, right? And same thing with, I think one of the ways that's helped us the most at this point is in information protection. Because we are, you know, and we've been proactive. We've put sensitivity labels in place in our organization. That's been helpful. But people overshare all the time. And having tools that detect that oversharing and send off alerts not only helps you cut off that oversharing, but it's a hugely valuable educational tool for the people that do that oversharing when they get the call and say, hey, you're doing something wrong here. So.
I think when I visited Coquitlam School, it was one of the messages that came through and stuck with me was the importance of that kind of data management and that allocation of sensitivity labels for everybody to know that. So that when a student or somebody else was doing a broad search across their entire kind of instance for grades, they're not going to get the, you know, year 11 teacher's entire grade book, which can happen, right? I'm going to share a very quick Australian story, not to do with technology, but AJ reminded me of it just then when she talked about enthusiastic people with good intentions bringing things in. History lesson, I am an ex-educator. In 1857, a farmer in Brisbane, Queensland, felt he'd like Queensland to be a little bit more like Britain. So he bought 24 breeding rabbits along to release to his property, and they loved it. They loved it big time. In fact, we have 200 million rabbits in Australia, and if you look up the rabbit-proof fence, it can be seen from space. And in fact, today, if you have a pet rabbit and you're caught in Brisbane, Australia, it's about a $46,000 fine for you to have that rabbit. They brought the rabbits over with good intent, but they had no idea what might happen next. They couldn't have imagined because it was outside of the scope of their experience. And you reminded me, AJ, of that. You made me think about my rabbit story, and you gave me a perfect segue. I'll be forever grateful. Thank you.
At the 3,000 apps I'm looking at that I know they're not approved that are using our district, that's how I feel.
Right, that is scary. Here's a question that I want to ask you, Lester. Obviously, I work from Microsoft. We've heard a lot about Microsoft sort of tools that are being used. Microsoft, apart from building M365 and Surface and all of that stuff, is the world's largest cybersecurity company. You know, we analyze 4 trillion signals each and every day. I found out the other day that before the Ukraine knew that they were going to be subject to an invasion, Microsoft knew beforehand because of those 4 trillion signals and got on the phone to NATO and Ukraine to say, we think something's going to happen because we're detecting all of these attacks looming. So Microsoft and security is, as the world's largest security company, is a good thing for us in education to have sitting beneath our work. But it's not a commercial break for us. What I want to ask you, Lester, is generally, how can EdTech companies, whether it's like Microsoft or any EdTech company, how can they best support universities in their approach? What works best?
So that's a great question. And so I think ed tech companies can best support higher ed by understanding the complexity of the environment and some of the challenges. And so I started off my career at ASU. I'm not going to say how long ago it was because then everybody in this room can do math. But I will say that coming back to ASU, one of the biggest challenges is even coming from Maricopa County by population is the 4th largest county in the US, the complexity of the compliance landscape and then just the organization as a whole is challenging unto itself. That coupled with the focus on research, and I think that's one of the big delineations. So if you're an ed tech company wanting to be supportive from an information security perspective of higher ed, is understanding what those challenges are and partnering with us along those lines. Because as big as ASU is, we have our own challenges, you know, and some basic blocking and tackling, which I'm working towards along those lines. But providing real support and understanding about where our priorities are in particular. And I will say this, and this is not necessarily unique to higher ed, I think every sector can resonate with this, is more often than not, the technology is not the problem. You know, it's the process, the workflow, the adoption of, you know, security controls in particular. And so I think, and I bring that up because oftentimes technology companies want to fit a square peg in a round hole, so to speak, and it just doesn't always work. So I think being collaborative along those lines and understanding what the dynamics and challenges are would go a long way.
Thanks for that. Peter, talk a little bit about, when I'm having conversations with people about AI, we invariably end up talking about 2 things. We talk about cloud, and we talk about security. We talk about migrating workloads to the cloud for various reasons. We talk about then cloud and security. So I just wonder whether you could just noodle on that beautiful little unholy triad of AI, security, and cloud migration in your perspective.
Sure, Mark. First off, you know, the democratization of the technology itself lends itself. There's definitely a benefit across the board for the use of different types of applications, but it comes with challenges that you're hearing from the other panelists here. that, you know, when we open up these things, you know, the security that goes along with that, the exposure of data, making sure that it exists within a particular platform that has the compliance requirements is very important. It keeps me at least very busy on trying to analyze every one of these contracts that are coming in. Where is this data going to be existing? Is it going to be existing in someone's server? Is it going to be existing on a cloud environment? And what security measures are going to be followed? Is there a RAG that's going to be applied to that as well? Are these third-party companies using our data to train their models? So it presents a whole heap of challenges for us. And that's the ongoing, you know, again, the ongoing task of addressing these problems of the platforms, the vendors that we're partnering with, and making sure that we first off, I should have started this with first, what problem are we trying to solve? Get into that root cause of the problem. You know, then bring in a vendor, ed tech company that can provide a solution, a service that it's basically getting back to basics on a solution that we can work on and addressing a bigger problem that either a district, university, or K12 is addressing or needing some assistance with.
Okay, thanks. AJ, I want you to talk a little bit about the role of policy at Prince William, how you've approached it. One of the I'm on an AI advisory board for the Mid-Pacific, and one of their first things was trying to work out what they should do first. You know, should I tackle infrastructure first? Should I tackle, you know, our organization of our, you know, our data estate? Should I tackle the student devices first and make sure they're all, what shall we start with? Tell us a bit about policy and its role at Prince William.
Yeah, so, you know, our first goal was ensuring we had safe network, right? That's where we got to be safe. And I think from there, it just kind of falls naturally. But even as safe as I feel our network is, we have those wonderful students who like to be courageous and adventurous, and they like to get around that network once in a while. And so, you know, yes, we do have policies and regulations in place, and we, you know, if you do something wrong, you're held accountable for it. But when I have a student, a high school student, a middle school student, even a fifth grader, get around our system, they're not in trouble. It's more of, let's sit down. Explain to me how you did that. Oh, okay, I didn't know you could do that. Thank you for showing me that. Because now we're at a point where I need to flip the switch for the student to become that ethical hacker, right? I need them to know, hey, that's not okay to do that. You broke a rule, you broke a policy, but we can turn this around and we can make it good. And so that's kind of that lesson of I'm protecting them, we're showing them, hey, you can't do that, but how did you do that? And let's do this differently. And how can we make this a positive? So that's something we try to focus on. And I've met with numerous high school students, especially we have 2 IT programs that have quite a unique set to get around our network sometimes.
Sounds like constant pressure testing for your system.
They're very good testers, and I have hired actually a couple of them.
I love the way you spun it as desirable entrepreneurship. I thought there's a pragmatic optimist in the house. Thank you for that. Stephen, how about you reflecting on Coquitlam, particularly around policy or governance? What are some of the key areas that you've been working on to enable you to have the success that you've had in terms of creating a safe working environment?
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier, we've been really focused on information management in general. And so one of the things that I think is really important is engaging in policy training for staff in coordination with the introduction of new technology. So we have a wonderful opportunity right now with the emergence of AI to actually leverage that adoption of new technology. There's excitement about it, there's fear about it, there's a need for people to learn about it. And if we align our policy work that we do with that transition that's happening in practice, it creates a wonderful chance for us to reinforce policy elements that maybe people weren't as sharp on as they should have been, or haven't paid as much attention to. But you need a bit of shake-up sometimes for the policy to really sink in. And so when we talk about things like staff being in the habit of just going to a conference and being introduced something and wanting to use it the next day, I think what's come out of some of these bigger changes recently is a willingness to process this notion that actually we need to analyze that for privacy, because the privacy matters, and if you make mistakes with it, it actually could have consequences. And I think the emergence of these new technologies are helping promote the awareness of that.
Innovation at the speed of security. Again, I like that, because we don't want to curb people's enthusiasm, but we also can't introduce risk. Back in the 17th century, it was understood that a witch could not step across your threshold unless invited. So a witch had no power over you, or your house couldn't enter it unless you invited it across the threshold. They can be very tricky. And I think about that a lot with tools that I see online that are constantly begging to be invited in across your threshold. And it's our point to stop and ask the questions around: how is the data being gathered? Where is it being stored? How is it being used? Who can access it? How is it being disposed of? Those are key questions. If people can't answer those based upon an app or an AI tool that they've come across, if those questions can't be answered, it must be a no. Let's just pick up that question. I want us just to go across to anybody. This whole, how do you balance between, if I pick up AJ's point, trying to foster a culture of innovation at the speed of security? How do you kind of navigate the people you work with who are very enthusiastic in ways that bring risk management in without us all being seen to be the grumpy naysayer? Let's start with you down at the end. Lester?
Sure, yeah, but you hit the nail on the head from my perspective. And so information security, not everybody understands that, but everybody understands the concept of risk, right? And so everything we do on a daily basis fundamentally is in large part based off of risk. And so I had this conversation earlier, so for those of you who have had the pleasure of talking or meeting Dr. Crow, the president of ASU, you know, one thing that I'm never going to do is say, no, you can't do that, President Crow, because then I'll be hitting one of you up for a job, right? And so, but that's not information security's role. Our role is to enable the organization to accomplish its, you know, its objectives, but in a secure fashion. And part of that basically involves being able to put things in the context of risk and explain there's consequences, right? And if I'm really on my A game, hopefully I'll have a compensating or mitigating control or a 3 in my hip pocket where I could then say, if you want to do this, here's my recommendations on reducing the risk down to a level that I believe is acceptable to the organization. But then the other aspect of that is, as a CISO for ASU, Maricopa County, or other positions I've held, I cannot accept risk on behalf of the organization, right? And so that's a decision that needs to be made by management. And so how do you affect and create that environment? And going back to you know, the topic of governance, right? And so that's why governance is so important from my perspective, that you have to have the framework in place so you can have those conversations and enable the business decision makers to make those decisions along those lines. And so just real quick, so one example of that practically in my 4-month tenure is ASU's decision on whether we would support the implementation of DeepSeek. So long story short, we put a framework in place where we could, in very limited controlled fashion based off of our environment, if there was a legitimate research need to implement DeepSeek, we would be able to do that in our walled garden custom bespoke environment. But and so because we have confidence that we can control the ingress, egress of data, et cetera, right? So instead of just taking a position of no, which a lot of organizations have done, and in some instances, if you have limited resources, I understand that. But we try to always take a position where we want to enable the organization to be innovative and move at the speed of security. But in our instance, we want that security to be a little bit faster than what would traditionally be the case.
It's a balancing act, right? I mean, we can't be Fort Knox, but we can't be the Wild West. And so from higher ed down to pre-K through 12, it's the same problem. We don't want to be the office of no, right? But it's our job to keep people safe.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important to emphasize here is in a context like ours is the importance of simplicity. I think when you get to the higher ed environments, this simplicity gets complicated really quickly. But for us, we've really leveraged notions of standardized approaches to doing things. I mentioned how we've really brought together our data set to get into a single environment. And in doing so, the argument for me there is that you get to also start to make those discussions about risk a little more accessible for people, because you can explain, this is the environment we have, these are the constraints of this environment, and here's the challenges that may come with things that we want to do off of that environment. And if we look to increase complexity, then here's the risk associated with that. And so for us, because of the resources that we have in K12 to be able to support this, we've really erred on the side of choosing to reduce complexity. Now, at any time, in order to do things, you may have to take steps into more complicated areas. So our focus has been working in an environment that allows us to, within a unified environment, do as much as we need to do as possible. And I think the decisions we've made around the Microsoft suite of products has really helped us with that. But being able to simplify that conversation is almost as important as simplifying the environment that it is that you're trying to control.
Good comments. As we move towards our wrap-up, I'm going to start with Peter. We're going to move, we've done the detecting, protecting. This will be the reflecting part, wrapping it up at the end. And this is really just an open-ended question on what you want to leave us with. Forward thinking, novel approaches, maybe you're employing students, maybe you're doing something that hasn't been done before, surprising insights, or even your next steps. It's up to you to give us a little bit of a reflection upon where you're at and where you might be. So let's start with you.
Sure. So at San Diego, we've created a Department of Innovation, and I have a colleague here in the audience here, Elaine, who's leading that initiative with regards to providing information, guidance to faculty. We talked about risk in the prior question, so ditto to Lester on your feedback, was well done. In my department, I've actually hired 5 students. We have a baccalaureate program at San Diego City. I brought on those 5 students to provide support, so we have awareness campaigns. They're also they're participating in the SOC analysis that we have as well. So it's really important that, one, I get help from some really smart individuals, but more importantly, we're creating a pathway for those individuals for jobs. If they stay with us, great. If they are able to move on, great as well. At San Diego as well, we are partnering with the State Chancellor's Office, the Governor's Office, the CSU, and the UC system. So we're part of something called the National Research Platform, the first community college district in the nation that's doing this as well. So we allow our faculty, I mentioned about the software stack, the stack, or level 2 of that stack, allows the AI development and that environment for faculty to actually start teaching within an ecosystem that's safe and secure. So this is a moving target. You have to stay ahead. You have to, it's going to keep us busy. This is not a one and done. So it's an exciting opportunity for us as we continue to evolve our positions in really enhancing and developing the future of support within this environment. Thanks for that.
Reflecting for us, AJ, what are new, surprising, different that you're working on?
So I think for us, I mean, we have, we use Copilot for the school division for staff, not all staff, but quite a few of them. But I think for us, it's at the end of this month, we are implementing some of the AI features for our high school kids. That's a first for us. And so it's nerve-wracking, but it's exciting. And so that's kind of our next step, like what AI can we implement that is safe enough to keep to also enhance and be innovative at the same time to enhance their learning.
Love it. Lester.
So 2 things. You mentioned as a SOC environment, right? We're in the process of consolidating and finalizing bringing our SOC in-house, but our Tier 1 is going to be ran by students. Give them practical experience along those lines, but on top of that, not the traditional tier one SOC where you do IOC enrichment and, escalation, et cetera, et cetera. We eventually want to create a program where they're doing SOAR playbooks and then leveraging agentic AI, because really, if we weren't higher ed and I was running a security team, I probably wouldn't be looking at staffing my tier one with actual people, right? But in this instance, because of our mission, that is something that we're focused on along those lines. So equipping them with the tools and the skill sets to be competitive in the market along those lines. So that's just one example.
Good one. Thank you, Lester. And Stephen, final word.
Yeah, we're implementing a number of agents right now to help make us more efficient, particularly focused in areas like, for example, all our endpoint deployments are in Intune at this point. There's the emergence of agents that can help us do vulnerability detection in that. Same thing with agents that relate to I mentioned triage earlier, all of those pieces, but we're doing a lot of work with conditional access. And some of the agents will now help us analyze our conditional access to make sure that we're actually getting the protections out of it that we think we are. And so the emergence of all these new tools are just giving us a more powerful suite to be able to build that fortress around our data that we talked about.
Thanks, Stephen. And colleagues, could you just join me in thanking our panel, AJ Phillips, Lester Godsey, Stephen, and Peter, not forgetting you. Thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon. Our friends, apart from Peter, who's going to run and catch a cab, are around for a few moments if you want to pick their brains about something you've heard or want to ask me more about the rabbit-proof fence in Australia. You're welcome.